Hello, my name is Sabine Knierbein. I'm an associate professor for urban culture and public space at TU Wien and at the Faculty of Architecture and Planning, and I'm also there heading the so-called Interdisciplinary Center for Urban Culture and Public Space, where we focus on urban studies with a specific expertise in the field of lived space, public space and urban cultures. As part of the EPUM project, which is an Erasmus Plus project cooperation on emerging perspectives on urban morphologies, I am actually, together with my colleagues Thieme Wiedermann and Katharina Höfberger, we are developing an approach that could be considered as a, let's say, relational material approach to urban morphology studies. We are conceived as an innovative actor because we transfer expertise from our field to the field of urban morphology studies. And in that sense, we are currently setting up our morphology approach, and we have involved students also in reflecting on this approach with us together in different formats, and we are very much looking forward to finalizing this sort of approach development and also further theorizing it. So our center has been funded 10 years ago to tackle the relations between the built space and the lived space. Our center is the Interdisciplinary Center for Urban Culture and Public Space at the Faculty of Architecture and Planning of TU Wien in Austria in Vienna. And we are basically touching the interface between urban studies, urban design and urban planning. And maybe diving into this depth of knowledge production on everyday life, on how the micro can be explored to understand the macro structures and the mesostructures, is already yet a hint to give you an idea why we are so much interested in the built urban form. Space is in flux, and particularly public space is always very contingent and also dynamic, so it's very hard to plan it. But there's also a morphology to public space. So on the one hand, what is socially produced will turn out in a sort of material structure of the city, and on the other hand, if there's social processes, the urban morphologies can help us to visualize these power dynamics, but also inclusions, exclusions, innovative potentials of public spaces. We will give you some examples later. As you can see from the image, we start off with a very romantic picture, of course, of the morphology of parts of Vienna, seen from the Kahlenberg region, which is a nice vineyard area. Vienna is very much known for a city where the morphology has allowed to take a tram to go to the vineyards and also enjoy your leisure time. But Vienna is also a city that has been planned over centuries with a particularly urban morphology. What we would like to add to that reading of the traditional morphology and maybe also to other urban morphology approaches is this idea between society and space that is not of so much quantitative nature but much more of qualitative nature. So our center is very much trying to connect social theory, cultural theory, political theory about urbanization and the built fabric, the built urban fabric, with actually knowledge on the micro spaces of the city, the lived spaces, those spaces that people, how Sophie Watson from Open University in London called it, where people rub along, so our everyday interface. So no city is like another, and that's maybe also what you can read through the built urban form particularities. You can also relate back to how cities work, how they have grown, so there are past dependencies in urbanization processes. This has been a studio project of self-organized students from various study directions like building engineering, architecture, planning, and they said we had a bailout of banks nearly, and so the banks have been saved with public money. And the students said, we can't grasp these numbers, they are too abstract. Like financial capitalism is too abstract for us to make sense out of it. But what we can do is we try to visualize it through our own disciplinary praxis. And that's why they set up a model. This project has been called HyperTopia, and you can also look it up on the internet and also see who was the originator of this HyperTopia project. So this was student work. There was no teacher telling them to do so, but they themselves came up with the idea. And they actually calculated a whole city that could be constructed out of the money that had been given to the banks, actually, in order to make sense out of this big sum of money. And they built like water, cleansing plants, hospitals, schools. They also built different types of dwellings, energy-saving plants, etc. So they really invented a whole city from that fictive money, and they built it here with concrete and wood. And it was displayed in one of the main squares in Vienna, in Karlsplatz, in the fountain, just in front of the Karls Church, a very historic site. And when it was deconstructed, like 4 weeks later, the students were actually asking for a demonstration to take a piece of concrete or a piece of wood and to carry it to the Austrian parliament and to leave it in debris in front of the parliament, and also to claim their resistance against this type of policies. So in this sense, urban morphologies are not only an entry dimension to urban studies, but they are also an output, a visualization of urban resistance. And this relation for us is of key importance, because when I said that we are investigating the qualitative dimensions of the interrelations between society and space, we are very much interested in all these relations that you can see both in everyday life, but also in wider politics. And this everyday life dimension, of course, is very different from district to district, or as we call the smaller units within the district, the neighborhood units here. It's Grätzl, there in Vienna. In Berlin, there would be a Kiez. These like everyday units. We are not so much interested in quantitative flows of pedestrians or in how one street is historically more important than another street, but we are interested in the everyday routines of the urban inhabitants and how these routines both shape urban morphologies and are influenced by these type of urban morphologies. And of course, this search for understanding the link between social, empirical, qualitative empirical research and the built urban form is nothing but easy. It's quite complex. But also at the same time, it can reveal a lot of things that maybe sociologists or geographers might not be able to identify, because they are not so closely bound to analyzing space. And that's also why it's interesting to have innovative crossovers situated at architecture and planning faculties that try to reach out towards urban studies, towards cultural studies, towards urban geography, human geography, but also towards, let's say, innovative approaches to sociology. So at our center, we follow two premises and we try to combine them. We call them KnowHow and KnowWhy. What usually social scientists learn a lot is to analyze ex post how a city or a phenomenon in transition, like urbanization phenomenon, has been shaped. Whereas architects and planners are much more interested in how to improve the city, and they have a quite normative stance. And we call that KnowWhy in terms of the social sciences and KnowHow in terms of the spatial arts. And what we do is facilitating productive crossovers between KnowHow and KnowWhy, but also pointing to the differences between these knowledge fields and how there's frictions, because some of these knowledge fields would, for example, when we practice a methodology that we've been quite intensively developing or further developing, it's not new. Here is participatory action research. When we practice this has a lot to do with everyday routines, but also with research ethics. This is particularly at the interface between KnowHow and KnowWhy. And what we do is we usually involve NGOs in our work and also try to not just work with the expertise in order to dig it out and make it useful for us as scientists, but at the same time encourage ourselves and the students to think what we can give back, so that nothing should be produced just for us, but there should always be a benefit for the community from that. People who contribute to our processes are invited as guest critiques in order also to learn from what our students or what we have been researching, and also to get into mutual dialogue between different fields of knowledge, like everyday knowledge, tacit knowledge that results actually from the embodied encounters in public space. So a very important aspect maybe in understanding our relational material approach to urban morphology is the dimension of everyday life. Studying and de-everydaying everyday life and lived space, public space, not just as a space of public institutions, but genuinely as a lived space, a multiply layered lived space. It's very important really to understand that everyday life is a key entry dimension to track down not just micro changes. I think there has been a reduction of the importance of everyday life, but rather to understand this critique of everyday life as a genuine entry dimension into like more institutional regulatory changes on the mesoscale, but also more structural or even post-structural changes on the macro scale. Even a macro-scale urban morphology can be used quite differently through different appropriations of urban everyday life. What's interesting for us is maybe focusing on processes of emergence, in the sense that we are interested in the key features of how, for example, new acts of resistance for certain sites are displayed. Yeah, why are certain sites fought for and why are others not fought for? What does it have to do with what their morphology allows the overall society in terms of everyday use? So always linking back the built urban form with these everyday uses and how they have changed over the time. That's been quite a challenge also, because some might coin it as a very empiricist approach, but I would counter-argue that a lot of theory that we have been seeing on the city has been quite macro theory, informed by macro processes, etc. But there has not been so many attempts to really theorize from everyday life, from the lived spaces. And we need to recover these aspects, because in order to understand these multiple facets of contemporary social change that we are facing, we really need to understand the small nitty-gritty details of that. Coming from this reflection on everyday life, you can definitely see our approach is not yet finalized, but maybe what's more important for us that we are in the making, and what we would like to contribute actually to the project is, on the one hand, to give further stimuli to those approaches, traditional approaches in morphology studies that on the one hand involve time into the study of urban form, as like a socio-historic process, with a focus from us on the last, let's say, last century and this century, actually maybe after the Second World War, so more recent approach. But also, we would also like to focus on these aspects of urban morphologies that actually bridge between space and society. And so that are interested in this relation between space and society. What we are interested in is very much a qualitative dimension of the social life of urban form, as Fran Tonkis has called it. And in that sense, we would also include quantitative data if needed, but not necessarily all the time. Yeah, so that is one approach, maybe that differs a bit from the existing approaches. And a second thing is maybe what we would like to see by the end of this, and we would like to enrich the debate on urban morphology studies or the study of urban form, is very much to take into account that we think about research ethics, that we think about the relation between morphology and the spatial praxis of democracy, but also that we think about the link between the vast body of theories that we find in the study of urbanization. That could be cultural theory, social theory, or even political theory. And it would be really great to develop approaches that come from this field of cultural, social, and political theory to the study of urban form. And in that respect, by the end of this project, we would like that morphologists also naturally include the study of urban resistance, the study of urban emancipation, and more broadly, the study of urban life in relation to the study of urban form. Thank you so much.